Hello, everyone. Welcome to the St. Louis Art Museum's Art Speaks program. My name is Jessica Kennedy, and I'm the educator for adult learning at the museum. Before we begin, please familiarize yourself with the Q&A section located on your screen. Feel free to enter your questions at any time during the program, and we will choose a few to answer at the end. Also, there is live auto transcription available for this program. Please click the CC icon to activate or deactivate the subtitles. For today's talk, Reinstalled Galleries for Oceanic Arts at SLAM, we are joined by Nicole Bridges, the Morton D. May Curator of the Arts of Africa, Oceania, and the Americas at the St. Louis Art Museum, and another speaker who Nicole will introduce in a moment. Thanks, Nicole.
Thank you, Jessica, and hello, everyone. I wish I could see you, but thank you for attending today. It's my pleasure to introduce Philippe Peltier, the former senior curator and head of the Oceania and Insulandia unit at the Musée du Quai Branly Jacques Chirac in Paris. An expert in oceanic art, Philippe has conducted almost 3 years and more of fieldwork in New Ireland, and in New Guinea and the Sepik River region. Philippe collaborated with me and Amy Clark, Senior Research Assistant, in developing the new Oceanic Art Galleries, which reopened in May after a long period of closure for structural improvements and renovation. Philippe may be familiar to many of you, especially to our longtime members. He was co-curator, along with former SLAM curator Michael Gunn, of the 2006 exhibition New Ireland Art of the South Pacific. Philippe has curated many exhibitions on the subject of oceanic art, and as well as several on the intersection of oceanic art with modernism. Now, before Philippe speaks to focus on specific highlights, specific works of art in the new galleries, I'll briefly walk us through virtually the new galleries to help provide an overview of this new space and to familiarize you with the display context for the specific works of art that Philippe will address. So what we're looking at right now is the entrance to the galleries, Gallery 109, which is the entrance that you would approach the museum, approach the Oceanic Galleries from either the Ancient Americas Galleries or from the concourse, from the parking or cafe. This gallery is themed, let me just advance ahead. The theme of this particular gallery is called Pacific Pioneers, Arts of Their Descendants, and the focal point is really along the right, this sequence of captivating small-scale canoes that are meant to honor the founding ancestors who began to settle the Pacific Islands starting as many as 50,000 years ago. And then the objects along the left are various canoe ornaments, sterns, prows, and even a ceremonial paddle in the back that help to ornament full-scale canoes and also acknowledge and celebrate those founding journeys. Some more views of Gallery 109, of the model canoes. And these are canoes and artworks or canoe ornaments coming from across the Pacific. So in a way, this kind of serves as an introduction to the great expanse of geography that we'll encounter in the remaining galleries, which are organized geographically. And these are specific canoe ornaments that Philippe will address later on. Our Maori canoe, or stern post. In Gallery 106, this is a gallery that is dedicated to art from Melanesia specifically as an introduction. This is the other approach to the Oceanic Galleries coming from the direction of the African art galleries. And this is also another introductory area to introduce us geographically to arts of Melanesia, as well as to the overarching concept of ancestors and the way that the arts perpetuate Pacific communities understanding, appreciation, and honoring the ancestors. These are the works from New Ireland that Philippe will speak to specifically. Philippe will speak about this mask from Vanuatu. And then Gallery 107 continues our exploration of art from Melanesia, specifically looking at art from New Guinea. Now, this is the strength of our oceanic collection, art from New Guinea. And so this is also the largest section of the galleries. And we have a vast range of sculpture, masks, architectural elements like the one in the back. And then Gallery 108 is dedicated to our small but kind of treasure-like selection of works from Polynesia. These Maori men's house panels introduce us to that space. And then once you enter this very intimate area, you see our individual treasures from Polynesia, decorative elements, sculpture, domestic arts, food-related arts, and Philippe will speak specifically about the Fijian breastplate. Now, I will say that it's important to acknowledge that our oceanic collection really would not be possible without the generosity of the late Morton D. May. Morton May was a voracious collector of art from around the world, and the museum at large has benefited from his generosity. 70% of our oceanic collection comprise gifts and a bequest from Mr. May. St. Louisans would know him as the CEO of the former May Company department stores, which were known locally as the famous bar stores. It's thanks to this collection that the St. Louis Art Museum is really just one of very few art museums in the United States that maintains an active presence and an active program for oceanic art within the context of the art museum. And it is this collection, along with several of the others that in the department that I oversee, that really help to make St. Louis the global collection, the encyclopedic collection that it is today. And so with that, I will turn it over now to Philippe, and we'll explore more in depth some individual works of art.
Okay. Thank you, Nicole. Hello to everyone. I must apologize for my English because as you clearly understand very quickly, I'm French. I'm not a born English language, so if you don't understand things I said, please send a question and we will try to answer later on. The first object I want to talk about was we choose with Nicole, and I thank Nicole to invite me for that speech and the help of the to organize everything from the SLAM Museum and all the people who organize everything and help for the from the SLAM Museum. The first things we pick up with Nicole was that prow, a stern prow, in fact, from New Zealand. It's quite an impressive object. In New Zealand language, in Maori, they are called taurapa, and the canoe they are built on are called vaka. But those terms are very special to what is known in the literature now as a war canoe. You have in the showcase at the museum another prow from New Zealand, which is not from a work canoe, but which is from a fishing canoe. You know, people do different canoe depending on the activity they have. The work canoe belong to a very, each work canoe look the same. You have a maquette of that canoe in the collection, and you can see the prow and the stern prow and the prow, which are quite different. But they usually, as far as we know, they have about the same, you know, aspect. They were a very, very large canoe. We can, you know, fit inside about up to 50 people. They were not built all the time. They were dismantled when they were not in use and when it was no war or very important ceremony. And one of the main part of that canoe was that stern post. It's a very, very complicated structure, as you can say, very elaborate structure with 2 ribs. No, you can't see, you know, those 2 ribs which are going on the top of the canoe, and we end up, you can't really see it, but by a figure, which is called Maina. We don't know exactly what represents that figure, but there is a kind of try to interpret all that you know, very complex structure. I would come back to that before, but so there is 2 ribs and a figure on the top of those 2 ribs. On the side of those 2 ribs, there is, as you can see there, on the other picture, the picture which is next, you know, there is a spiral, which is the main, the dominant patterns on the object. Those spirals are called in Maori pitau, that spiral, the motif of that spiral, the design of that spiral, become more and more important during the time, and especially in the 19th century. You know, they become one of the main design on the stern. It does exist before in some of the objects we know from before the 19th century, but they are more like a circle or things like that, or design like that. That spiral referred to the sprout of a fern. I don't know if you have in your mind the sprout of a fern. You know, it's a kind of, well, its design is also a spiral. And some of the people think it's the images of, it referred to the sun, which is, you know, coming every morning and giving light, during more and more light during the day. And it's also referring to the growth of the clan to whom the canoe belong. You know, it's the strengths of the clan and the growth of the growing numbers of the clans through time. You know, the sun is coming every day and is growing every day. At the base of that stern pole, there is a figure which you can see on the 3rd images, you know, and that figure, it's called, generic term is called Pu'i, Kai, Ariki. Ariki, it's the term for the chief. It's supposed to be a chief of a clan, which is the referred to the ancestral man who give who is at the origin of the clan, to whom the canoe belong, and is that image referred to the first ancestor who arrived in New Zealand. In Pacific, New Zealand is quite exceptional because it was the last island to be where the people from the Pacific arrive. Up around the 10th, or well, deaths depend. You know, the deaths are moving all the time. But now I think that the people think it's between the 11th century and 12th century. The first canoe come from Polynesia, actual Polynesia, and with people people start to install in New Zealand. So it's a fairly recent installation of people in New Zealand. It's a fairly new population. Well, new population when you think about the first population arriving in Oceania. The chief of the canoe, the canoe who arrived at that time, the chief of the canoe become the first the ancestor. And that image is there on the war canoe of the ancestor who was the founding man of the groups to whom the canoe belonged. Each canoe had a name, and the clan is known by the name of the canoe. You know, it's the same name of the clan of the and the war canoe. The canoe is seen as the house of the chief, and so the canoe by itself is the emanation of the symbol or the representation of the chief. And so the stern referred to the design of the stern referred to the growing, the strength of the clan. Which is quite interesting in that also that kind of stern become more and more. It looks like that kind of stern become more and more common at the end of the 18th century and the beginning of the 19th century. We know from older pieces some other design which disappear in the 19th century, and that type of decoration become the main decoration in the 19th century. And that stern is interesting by as all the stern, which looks like that, we are very similar to that one. Kind of quick are the image, how do you say it in English? La preuve d'un changement, the changing time due to colonization. It's probably a 19th century stern, but it's a very interesting piece because of the history, the proof of the history which is behind. Okay, we can perhaps move to the next object, and I would be happy to answer your question if you have any question. The next object I want to talk about, the model canoe I talked about before, and the stern is there, the big stern, and you have a detail of that, and you see that the prow is quite different in his decoration, and probably the story of the prow, the symbolic of the prow is also quite different, but you can find, I don't know if you can see it, but you can find spiral there again on the prow of the canoe. Next one. Okay. I was talking about the other type of prow, canoe prow, which is not from a war canoe, but from a fishing canoe. Okay. You see, it's quite different. Okay. The other object I was only to talk about is that species which is very exceptional in a collection. It comes from a very tiny, the map. Okay, it comes from a very tiny village in New Guinea. We are north of Australia. New Guinea is a very large island with many different population inside. And north of New Guinea, there is a big river called the Sepik River. And then in what we call the Middle Sepik River, there is one village, which is, the population is called Ngala. It's only one village. There is 3 yards in the village. And those Ngala people, we think they arrived kind of late in the Sepik River. And they were fighting people. They were fighting with other groups around them, okay? But as a village, you can imagine that the production of object was very little. And you are lucky enough in Saint Louis to have one of the canoes, again, what we call the canoe shield, was also used during the war. The Sepik, that region is a swamp, and you have to imagine that people spend most of their time in canoe. Okay, and they have, once again, as in New Zealand, canoe, special canoe for war. It's the same story. The canoe is named by the name of the ancestor who was the founding people of the clan to which the canoe belonged. It's only used during the war. Otherwise, it's stay near the big man's house. They have a man's house, common house in those villages. And during the wartime, those shield canoe are put in front of the canoe. I will come back to that. Can we have the next images? Yeah, okay. As you can see, that shield is done by the back is kind of leaf, very hard leaf, a palm, in fact, part of a palm tree, the leaf of a palm tree, the base of the palm, which are attached together. And on that surface is painted in white. There is almost no white left there. And you have 2 black discs on each side. And in the middle, there is a carving, in fact. And you can see that there is, okay, there is 3 parts of that carving. Down below, there is a kind of design. And if you look at the design more attentively, you have a kind of mouth at the bottom of that part. Okay, and then you go up. You have kind of abstract design, and on the top you have 2 black points who can be read as eyes. We know, as I said to you, those objects are very rare in collection. We know 2 other which are old pieces. One is in Berlin, and one in the museum in Berlin, and one in the museum in Basel. And those pieces are much more realistic figure on that part, which mean that we can imagine that part of the the base of that carving is probably a face. It's not a human face. It's not an animal face. It's difficult to say what it is. But the thing which is interesting is that it's very Sepik River. It's very New Guinea, because a lot of art in New Guinea play on the representation. You never know what you are looking for, what you are looking at, sorry. It's always something which is very ambiguous, it can be this, but it also can be that. It can be read as a face, it can be read as an animal, for example, And on the when you go up that middle part, you have another visage that you face that you can't see really on the picture, and then a series of hook. And on the top that you can see on the picture, you have the figure of a bird. Okay, that bird is probably the one form of the ancestor. In New Guinea, ancestor can take many different forms, can metamorphose in different forms. So you see that shield is in fact the representation of the ancestor, of the main figure, the ancestor of a group to which the canoe belongs. Those shields were probably more symbolic than their protection. They are not very resistant, and during the war, when people were throwing spear, they can probably be destroyed very quickly. They can't really resist the spear of the enemy. But they are probably more kind of symbolic protection than a real protection in a canoe. Okay, but what's probably the most interesting, things to in that piece is, as Nicole said to you, you have the main collection in St. Louis is from the Sepik River, the Guinea, and especially the Sepik River. And this is really one of the, for me, something which is very Sepik in its representation. It's an ambiguity of representation, and it's why it's interesting to have in the on the show and on display to explain what the art of New Guinea is about. Can we? I take too much time. Can we go to the? Oh yeah. You have also next to it an element of a canoe in another region, just to show you again, the complexity of representation, which is quite fundamental for New Guinea, with things you can read like birds, but also other parts which are difficult to read, but which are also bird. Like if I said to you that things is the head of a bird, you will probably need to go in front of the pieces, real pieces, to see the bird. But once again, it's the complexity, the metamorphosis of the representation. Can we go to the next? Nico, yeah. Okay. Then in St. Louis, you are lucky enough to have a very good example of other objects, which are the what we call the Malangan sculpture, Malangan carving. They come from New Ireland, which is a long island, very, very long island of north of New Guinea. And they especially come from a tiny island of Tabar at the end of the red line on north of that red line. Up you can see 2 or 3 islands, and this is Tabar Island. And the Malangan tradition is supposed to come from that island. Those Malangan carving are made for more death ceremony. After the most, and they are done for the ceremony for very, very important men or women. When a very important man or woman die, usually 2 or 3 years after he die, or she die, people do erect a special enclosure, and inside the ceremony is going to happen inside that enclosure, and in that enclosure they erect a kind of wall on which they hang up carving of that kind. Okay, there is not many different kind of carving, but in each type of carving, they are all different from one to the other one. It's a very, very complicated. Usually, it's a very, very complicated carving, very elaborate. They were very well known up at they become to be very well known at the end of the 19th century, when the German take over New Guinea and New Ireland as a colony, and the first people who arrived in New Ireland were, when they saw those carving, were absolutely fascinated because it's a very complicated carving, it's a very elaborate carving, and it's a painted carving. Okay, and for them it was something they were not expected. You were not expected to find in a primitive society. So a huge amount of those objects have been collected at the German time. Usually those carvings were destroyed at the end of the ceremony, but because the demand of the German and especially the in ethnographical museum were built at that time was huge. The demand was huge for those carving. German people who live in New Ireland try to board them, and people understand that they can have money from that money of that time, and they start to sell them those objects. They tell them because at the end of the ceremony, the carving had no use anymore. At the end of the ceremony, traditionally the carving were threw in the forest or threw in the garden and disappear. The carving had no importance anymore. It plays its role during the ceremony, but at the end of the ceremony, have no importance anymore. You have 2 types of that carving in the in your collection. One is a bird in the middle of the carving with a very big tail at the end, and then there is all those motif on the top, and it's a very complex motif on the side. For example, in the little side, you can see there is a bird with a very big tail, but there is also another bird on underneath, you know, with the eyes and the beak there, and then again, you know, a very big tail. If I could remember, somewhere there at the end of the beak of the man figure, there is the representation of a fish. It's a very intricate carving, and in fact their use is very complex because it's I said to you, when a man died, he had the carving which belongs to him are shown again and are given to the next generation, to a man or a woman, to a young man or a young woman of the next generation. Okay, and when that man received that carving, in fact, he received the right to on ground, on sea or lagoon, the right to to have garden or to have fishing place in the territory of his clan, which is related to that carving. This is a very complex way to transmit a right you have to make, you know, to make your garden or to do your fish, have your fishing place. It's quite a fascinating thing. The next images, next to that pieces, you have another carving, which is, as you can see, a figure, you know. And don't think that this is the image of the dead. I said to you, it's done for the a funerary ceremony, but this is not the image of the dead. This is the image of as the bird, as the fish, is the image of the spirit who live in the ground, in the sea, in the forest, in the mountain, and which are keeper of those places, you know. And when you receive those places as an heritage, you know, and the right to make things on those places, you know, to open garden or do other things, you know, or you have a special relation with those spirit, you know, and it is those spirits which are in the ground who give you the permission, who make that what you are going to do in those places. For example, that if you do a garden, you have to have a good grow of the vegetables or the yam, the taro you are growing on that place, and it's the force, you know, those spirits make them grow and help you to have a lot of, for example, a lot of food or a lot of pigs or things like that, you know. So it's not once again, it's not the image of the dead. It's the image of the spirit who live in the ground, in the sea, that you receive when you when someone die and give you the right to exploit, to have access to that, and you do your own production there. Okay, can we move to the next? Oh yeah, okay. The next image is which is quite a very incredible pieces to, it's coming from Vanuatu. And it's Vanuatu, it's a tiny, it's a groups of islands which are south of Salomon Island. And in Vanuatu, there is especially one island, many islands, but one island is Malekula. And Malekula, that pieces, that mask you have in the collection is coming from Malekula. It's coming even from the south of Malekula and even from the Southwest Bay, what we call a bay, which is at the west of the south of Malekula, okay? You can ask me why I do know that. It's because we have similar images in other museums, and we know they are all coming from that region. The mask is in itself very impressive and very interesting because it's not a wood carving. The face which is down below is a piece of wood, okay? But the figure which is behind is not a piece of wood. It's usually, well, even if three fern appear on the top of the part of three fern appear on the top of the on the face. It's more done like a bundle of vegetables, you know, of plants. Like also like the legs of the figure, you can see, you know, where lost is I'm going to talk about that. Lost is cover there. You can see part of the you know, the bundle of things which are doing the figure. So it's not really a carving. It's like more an assemblage. You know, putting together part of things you go and collect in the forest. On the top of that, there is this a special mixture of different part of vegetables or part of tree or things like that, which are mixed up together, and would do a kind of past in which you add a special vine, you know, special things which are inside, get a kind of glue, and you mix everything and you cover the mask with that, okay? And then you bend the mask on the, you know, it's not something which is carved, it's something which is done with addition of things, you know, and then you paint the mask. As you can see, the painting, some of the painting, and especially the blue, is not original from Vanuatu. It's what we call the washing blue. If you look at your washing powder you put in your when you clean your, you know, in your washing machine, there is a little part of blue things, you know, it's white and blue. In fact, there is little blue, and this is exactly the same color as the one you have on that object. It's in French we call it le bleu guillemets. It's an invention of the end of the 19th century, and when the people in Vanuatu at the end of the 19th century, when the first colonial people, the Mek who do plantation, the people who do plantation in Vanuatu arrive, they have that blue with them for washing, you know. And the people in Vanuatu were just fascinated by that blue. because it was very close to a green they have, but it was a very rare green. It was only coming from one island in Vanuatu, not in Malekula, and to have that green for the ceremony was supposed to have a lot of exchange, and it was very expensive to have that blue. You know, you have to exchange a lot of things to get that green for the object. So when they saw that blue, they use that blue for the object. But you have also other things who come from colonial time, like one in the eyes, in one of the eyes, the one on the left. Left side is a piece of glass, and this is coming also from the a bottle bring by the colonial people. So that piece is probably have been done during the mid 20th century. Malekula at the end of the there is a huge decline because of very violent contact with the colonial force and the people, and then a lot of epidemic come up in Vanuatu. A lot of people die at that time, and the population in Malekula just grew up slowly during the beginning of the 1920s, and the society recovered at the end of the 1920s and the beginning of the 30s, and little by little, it was kind of revival of all the ceremony. That mask belonged probably to that revival, either before the First World War or after the First World War. You know, there is we know. You know, they are quite not current in the collection, but we know more than one example. You know, more than one exemplar in the collection. In collection, they were by men during what we call in Vanuatu. There is a society which is organized. The men's society is organized, but what we call in hierarchy grade, a grade hierarchy, you know, that which means that a man during his life is going up a grade society, you know, as he can, when he can, he buy a new level in that hierarchy society, you know, in the hierarchy of the society, he buy a new level, and at each level he buy a new object, which can be mask, which can be drum, he erect a stone, but which can be also body decoration. Okay, and he dance, and people dance with them in front of him. Okay, and that mask is one of the masks which is to one level of the society, a grade society, and which is dance when a man buy a new position in the hierarchy, you know. And it's not a mask, in fact. We said a mask, but it's not a mask. It's something which is wear on the head, but the face of the dancer is visible. Okay, and once again, that representation refer to the ancestor. The figure down below, the main figure, is the representation of Nevim Bumbao. Nevim Bumbao was the mother, the ancestor mother. But in the same time, she's a man-eater. She's an aggressor. She's someone which is very dangerous, you know. But she's it's for the people who are in keen with psychoanalysis. It's quite interesting, you know. He's the mother who eats in the same time, you know, and behind hair is Ambat, and Ambat is well, you have different interpretation, but Ambat is his husband, or can be his son. Okay. There is a huge mythology about Nevi Bumbao, and I'm going to finish because I'm late. There is a huge mythology about Nevi Bumbao, but which is interesting there is that the object is not a representation of a moment of the mythology, is representation of mythological ancestor, but the history is not said. You know, it's very common in the Pacific. And the last subject I want to talk about.
Philippe,
Yeah.
Philippe, I think maybe we should leave it there.
Okay.
And
yeah,
encourage our viewers to
yeah, sure.
galleries.
Sorry for that. I'm always too long.
I lost our.
But they are very
gallery
complicated,
view.
you know.
So this would be a good time to address some of the questions. I think there are some in the chat.
Yeah.
Jessica, thank you, Philippe. I mean, you've heard from one of the world's experts in Melanesian art, and so I think that our focus on the objects that Philippe was able to speak to today, I think, was really a wonderful opportunity. And
Absolutely.
So thank you, Philippe.
Thank you. Yes, and we only have a few questions. So one was actually specifically about the Maori prow. I think the first one that you spoke about. And someone was wondering what tools were available or might have been used for that. And then also, what would it have been made by one single artist, or would it have been a group of people, or do we know?
Okay, the tools are, well, all the Pacific is stone tools. Okay, there is no iron, there is no metal tools in the Pacific. Okay, it's always okay. Some of the when you look at the stern or things, you see little carving on the surface. Those are done with stone at the beginning, and then when you want to go to very precise design, you can use teeth of animals, you can use teeth of animals. I'm not sure that in Maori they use teeth, but in the Pacific they use a lot of teeth. Then you have, when you build that, when you carve that kind of things, it's a very large one. It takes a lot of time. But you have usually one man who direct the work. Okay. It's always a man. When you do a carving like that, women are not allowed to come and see the act of carving, but you can have people who help you to do, part of the carving. You kind of ripples which are around you. But there is always someone who knows exactly how to do that and direct the work. Mm-hmm. And this is very, I remember I was very surprised in the Sepik, and this is very usual in Sepik River, but also in the, someone started carving, leave it on the floor house, and someone else come, take the carving, carve a little, leave it on the, and the third man come and carve again. Yeah, it doesn't matter, it's fine.
A little bit of a group effort then.
But there is always someone which is known as the carver, which is the reference, and which is the one who know the best and who do the best object. The best carving. That's the always the story.
Were those who were in charge, so those folks who were in charge, were they did they hold a special place within society? Were they well, the last one you were kind of talking about a hierarchy. Were these artists held in high esteem?
No, but they are recognized as important people. They have no special position in the society except that they are, a good carver. But they are recognized as a good carver. But when you carve very a symbolic object, in the traditional society, not a carving like as I said, everyone can carve something, but it's kind of a plate or things like that, even if there is decoration on it. But when you carve a very ceremonial object, or object for war canoe, which is a kind of a very symbolic object of the groups and things like that, you must you must obey, or you have obligation. For example, you can't eat some few special things. You are forbidden to eat special things. You are forbidden to have sexual relation. When you carve, you can't leave the chips of the wood. You have to collect them. I think you burn them. But not make it, used by anyone. So it's a very special time, and some are once again, some of the carving are done in secret, up to the time they are shown publicly.
Okay.
Philippe, thank you for and thank you. I just found the chat window, so or the Q&A window. So thank you for that question. And just quickly to address the question about provenance, there are frequent references in the gallery text to the historical context in which these works were collected. There are frequent mentions of colonial activity, missionary activity, and the presence and the arrival of tourists, and the way that those markets, that the tourist market or that these historical shifts affected the creation of art, the style, the aesthetics that you see in the art, and the movement of art across the globe. There are some particular, very specific works where we do spell out the provenance in the chat on the labels. So particularly what comes to mind right now are the Maori house panels, or where we lay out specifically who commissioned those, how they wound up on the market, but also the context for tourism for the small scale canoes, for instance. And then other than that, everybody's encouraged to visit our collections that are online, where provenance is fully detailed for everything that's on view, with notes and things like that. So that's a quick answer with what time is left.
Perfect. Thank you. That was going to be my next question for you, Nicole. So thank you for that. Okay, well, and thank you so much to both you, Nicole, and to Philippe. And thanks to everybody who joined us today. If you'd like, I encourage you to register to join us next Thursday, September 30th at noon, to hear curator Alex Marr discuss the artwork of Pueblo artist Tonita Pena, who was the only woman among the first native easel painters in New Mexico. You can register for that program and more at slam.org/events. And thank you all and have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.